the first thing to say is what a shame that we are not together. I wish we could be, but I mean, it's wrong for me to say we are not together. We're just not together in one place together. We are together in this place, and we should all be grateful for the technology that allows this to happen, and for the fact that we can see each other's faces when we wish to, which is really something quite beautiful. And also, as some have already commented, it means that those people who were not able to get together with us on Tuesday mornings when we used to meet may be able to meet us now in this space, which is just fantastic. And I'm so glad to see that so many people have chosen to meet us. So first, I want to say a big welcome back to the regulars of Jewish contemporary fiction. We have been doing this since 2004. And I think Charlotte Teeple, who is with us today, might have been back with us in 2004. The Rudermans, I'm not sure when you joined us, but that was then. Yes, that's what I thought. And there may be others since 2004, and it's now 2020. So this is a long-running program, and I'm grateful to my regulars. Welcome to my other regulars, and that's the Good Books regulars, all those wonderful people who join me every Tuesday for to hear good books, and thank you for coming. And a great big welcome to all of you who are in this space for the first time and haven't listened to me talk about books, or maybe have listened to me talk at one of your private book clubs. It's great to have you all here, and you are all so welcome. A big thank you, as always, to Debbie Spiegel at Holy Blossom for supporting this and every other literary program that Holy Blossom hosts and does it so well, and allows me to do the things that I love. Not this week because I've got all this to go through, but in the future, I will be telling you about the exciting guests that we will be having at the Holy Blossom Center for Contemporary Jewish Literature coming up over the next year. And thanks to Naomi, who is with us now and helping us as she does with Good Books. Thank you, Naomi, for all your help, and again, for your support too. So we have 4 classes and 3 books. We'll be doing Lear's Shadow first, followed by House on Endless Waters, and then finally getting to, in the final class, These Are the Names, which is the book that we would have been studying together in the spring, and then the pandemic hit. We're going to be a little bit flexible with our time, if you don't mind. We may go over the hour and a half.
Okay.
This is an hour and a half.
Thank you, Aviv there.
And we may be a little bit, flexible with that. Sometimes going a tiny bit over, and maybe sometimes ending a tiny bit before, but I kind of doubt that. I want to make sure that our books are fully explored before that last class. And don't worry if you have to miss a session. For everyone who is registered, that's all of you who are with us today and others, you will be able to access the recording. Naomi is recording this, so you will be able to access it, and I'm sure she'll let you all know how to get to the recording, which will be taken for each class. So just a reminder that this is different from traditional book clubs, where I usually present a book and sort of talk and then facilitate discussion. And it's different from Good Books, where I just chat about what I'm reading. Here, we learn together and from each other. So I will ask you questions and for your opinions, and that's really important to the way this works and the success of this. And I know it's harder on Zoom, but let's try to make it work. And here's how I think I can make it work. We'll see how it goes. And that is, if at any time, if you have a question, go to chat. I'm not sure if you can go directly to me on chat, but it doesn't really matter. I'll see the chats, and say your name and a question. I'll see it and I can call your name. I think with so many people, we can't really do this with just hands up. If I ask a question, do the same thing. Go to chat, give me your name, I'll see the list, and I'll come to you. Please, no comments on chat. I find it, I don't know how people do it, but I find it impossible to be reading chat, reading my notes, and having my brain go with what I'm talking about. I can't do all those things at once. So no comments on chat. If you want to make a comment, you'll make it to everybody and I'll call on your name. But if you have a question or a concern about something technical or administrative, I ask you to go to Naomi and ask her that question. So the other thing I wanted to say about the way our class has always gone in the past is that we've always shared bits of our histories and personal stories as we explore Jewish fiction together. And I encourage you to continue to do that. I think it's one of the things that makes this such a rich experience for everyone and allows us to get to know each other. And the more we know each other, the more comfortable we are in talking. So it just keeps going around like that. So our final class, as you know, is on These Are the Names. And I know that it might have been a difficult book for some of you to get. First of all, don't worry about that. I will give a summary of the book and a lot of the subject matter that we will be covering there, you will be able to follow just from the summary. But Barbara Hodes does have a copy of the book that she is willing to loan out before the last class if someone wants to read it. So if that's true, I don't know if you can chat to her directly, but if not, chat to me and I will let Barbara know and put the two of you together. Okay, with all that, if anybody has a question or a comment, this is a good moment to put it on chat and I will address that. As I said, Naomi's going to be around for a while, so you can also ask any kind of technical or administrative question of her. Okay, seeing nothing in chat, let me just make sure, no, nothing in chat. I am going to begin, this is exciting, with our first book, which is Lear's Shadow, and I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I did, and we will, of course, at the end have a chance just to hear your general comments on it. So I'm going to start with a synopsis of the novel. You know, it is a bit strange to be just talking like this to you all rather than, this is the hard thing about this. You kind of don't get any like emotive feedback, but I'll just keep going. The novel centers on Beatrice Rose, called Bee, and her father, Saul. She has a younger sister, Kara, with whom she is close. As their mother died when the girls were very young, she died in a car crash, and the car was driven by Saul, the father. He was at the wheel. Bee's life and business partner left her for another woman, and she can't run the yoga studio they owned together by herself. So she's at a bit of loose ends. On impulse, she accepts a summer job as the assistant stage manager of an outdoor production of King Lear, though she has absolutely no theater experience. The novel proper opens with her going to the theater company's meet and greet in a torrential downpour. And it turns out that Saul was out that night too, out in that storm. And disoriented by the storm and the protesting students who were out that night with their pots and pans, this is the casserole series of nightly protests in Montreal. So then we know the year that this is set, it's 2012. Saul is now in hospital and clearly suffering from mental issues. It's soon diagnosed as dementia with Lewy bodies, severe dementia, often displaying violence. When the doctor says Saul will only be intermittently stable, Bee moves in with him. Meanwhile, she helps out at rehearsals, working hard and learning as she goes. The important members of the company are these: Phil Burns, who plays Lear, a 69-year-old ladies' man once fairly successful and still with a great talent. Mimi, the director, who is his ex-wife, and Artie White, who plays the fool and was a childhood friend of Bee's, defending her on the playground when she was mocked because of her cleft palate and lip. Performances begin with all of the outdoor production challenges. Phil has some trouble with his lines and faints twice, but with Mimi taking him in and controlling his drinking, he can continue. Bee's sister and her husband own a raw food restaurant. Bee suspects Kara's husband is having an affair with his chef, and the two of them have been protesting and actually were arrested together and are quite at the forefront of the media. Saul is even more sure about that infidelity, and at a family brunch, he kind of misbehaves. He's very angry and accusatory. Later, at a party to celebrate the restaurant's expansion, Saul turns up unexpectedly, sees an intimate moment between Kara's husband and the chef, brandishes a knife, and then probably mistakenly stabs Bee in the chest, severely injuring her lungs. Saul is arrested and released to a psychiatric hospital. Kara leaves her unfaithful husband and with her two daughters moves into the family home with Bee and takes over Saul's successful clothing business. Bee recovers slowly, but is finally able to attend the final production of Lear and is in a loving relationship with Artie. Now a little bit about the author. Claire Holden Rothman is a Canadian novelist, short story writer, and translator. She has published 3 novels and 2 short story collections. Her first novel, The Heart Specialist, was a long-listed nominee for the Scotiabank Giller Prize in 2009, and her second, My October, was a long-listed nominee for the same prize in 2014, and a shortlisted finalist for Governor General's Award. Lear's Shadow was the winner of the Vine Award for the Canadian Jewish Literature, Rothman is also an award-winning translator. She lives in Montreal with actor and writer Arthur Holden. In the summer of 2011, Claire Holden Rothman had just completed the first draft of My October. Exhausted and at loose ends, not knowing quite what to do with herself, she found what she calls the closest thing to running away to the circus and served as assistant stage manager for Montreal-based Repercussion Theatre's summertime production of Macbeth. She's long been a fan of the American writer Michael Cunningham's practice of drawing direct inspiration from specific works of favorite authors, Virginia Woolf and Walt Whitman, and having done something similar herself with Gabriel Roy's The Tin Flute for My October, decided to use, instead of Macbeth, King Lear for her next novel. She says she always writes about fathers. Rothman's research included an interview with actor Simon Russell Beale, who played Lear in Sam Mendes' 2014 National Theatre production in London. Beale opined that Lear could have been suffering from Lewy body dementia, as I've told you, a brain condition distinct from, but often confused with Alzheimer's. So the novel we're studying today is certainly not a retelling of King Lear, a direct retelling of King Lear. And you don't even need to know the play to appreciate the novel. And you certainly don't know it especially well. But I would say that even if you think you don't know King Lear, you're going to be surprised at how much of its essence you've absorbed through sheer cultural osmosis and our collective narrative DNA. Besides, as Rothman points out, quote, Shakespeare himself was standing on the shoulders of an old legend. So now I am actually going to summarize King Lear for you, because maybe some of you read King Lear, but I'm sure some of you didn't get to it. I did read King Lear for the first time in I don't know how many decades, and I found it to be a really rewarding experience. as those of you who join me on Good Books would have heard. Okay, so here's sort of the joke summary of the book. King divides kingdom, snubs daughter, goes mad, there's a storm, and everyone dies. That is pretty close to what happens. Okay. Lear, king of Britain, in an attempt to avoid future strife, plans to divide his kingdom between his 3 daughters. His eldest 2, Regan, wife of Cornwall, and Goneril, wife of Albany, respond to his request for a show of love. And they do that in a very dramatic and overblown fashion. But the 3rd and youngest daughter, Cordelia, is unable to do that. She doesn't want to be hypercritical. She doesn't want to be hypocritical, and she doesn't want to be hyperbolic. But this enrages Lear, and he banishes her, and she leaves to marry the King of France. When his advisor, Kent, attempts to tell Lear he is doing wrong, he too is banished. There is a parallel plot in the play, as you will recall, with the Earl of Gloucester, another father. His bastard son, Edmund, is planning to gain his brother's Edgar's land by disinheriting him. He convinces Gloucester that Edgar is plotting against him and then persuades his brother to flee from his father's anger. To avoid arrest, Edgar disguises himself as a mad beggar, Poor Tom. Edmund joins Cornwall to fight for control of the kingdom. When Lear visits Goneril and Regan as part of his original plan, they insist he should reduce his retinue to none, basically, and treat him with no respect or love. He leaves the castle in a rage, going out to a violent storm, accompanied only by his fool and a disguised Kent. Lear harangues the storm, then meets Poor Tom, who he treats as a counselor. Gloucester tells Edmund of his intention to help Lear and advises Kent to take Lear to Dover, where Cordelia and a French army are to be found. But Edmund has informed on Gloucester, and when Gloucester returns to the castle, he is accused of being a traitor in one of the most dramatic, heartrending, and hard to accept scenes in Shakespeare. His eyes are put out, and he is thrown out into the wilderness. Edgar encounters his blind father, and as Poor Tom journeys with him to Dover, where Gloucester finds Lear. Both Goneril and Regan have developed feelings for Edmund, sexual feelings, creating a falling out between the two, ultimately leading to their deaths. Lear is found by Cordelia's army, but they are then taken prisoner by Edmund's soldiers, and Edmund orders them both to be killed. Albany challenges Edmund, and a disguised Edgar appears to fight him. Edmund is fatally wounded, and Edgar reveals himself. An order is sent to cancel Lear and Cordelia's execution, but it arrives too late to save Cordelia. Lear carries her in and soon after dies of a broken heart. So the main sources of Shakespeare's Lear are Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles of England and an old play called The True Chronicle History of King Lear and his 3 daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. As it happens, my major essay when I studied Shakespeare in university was on the parallels of King Lear with folklore, particularly Cinderella. Sigmund Freud has commented on the play and asserts that Cordelia symbolizes death. Therefore, when the play begins with Lear rejecting his daughter, it can be interpreted as him rejecting death. Lear is unwilling to face the finitude of his being. The play's poignant ending scene, wherein Lear carries the body of his beloved Cordelia, was one of great importance to Freud. In this scene, Cordelia forces the realization of his finitude, or as Freud puts it, she causes him to, quote, make friends with the necessity of dying. Shakespeare had particular intentions with Cordelia's death and was the only writer to have Cordelia killed of all the sources. In other versions, she continues to live happily, and in Holinshed's, one of the original, she restores her father and succeeds him. So it's interesting that Shakespeare did have a purpose with that death. There are also biblical echoes in this story, which I will discuss later. Okay, I'm going to pause for a moment from my talking here, and I ask if anybody has any questions so far. If you do, to put your name in chat, and I'll see you there. And if you don't, I am about to ask you my first question of you, and I hope someone will be willing to answer. And that question is, it's a big question. So let's start by thinking of all the ways that our author Rothman has used King Lear in her novel, and maybe give one or two ways. And I have quite a few myself that I've collected. So I'd like to hear from you now on anything that you would like to comment on how she has used it.
Do you want us to just speak or put our names in the chat?
How do you want to name on chat? That way I can go through the list, because let's try it this way, guys. And if it doesn't work, then I'll try just, you can speak. Okay, well, Judy, you are first. So please do comment.
Well, I mean, in terms of using the whole father-daughter dynamic, I mean, there's the obvious one with Bee and Saul, and another obvious one with Bee and her sister, because the sister doesn't think a lot of Bee, and there are times when Bee doesn't think a lot of the sister. So there's the tension between the sisters, particularly in terms of how their dad should be treated and looked after. So that's one. The other one is Bee, in her role as assistant stage manager, essentially gets stuck with being Phil's daughter, even though Phil tries to come on to her, which is so totally inappropriate. But because of his drinking, because of his own infirmities as a person, she kind of gets stuck in the daughter role. And Mimi, to a certain extent, Phil's ex-wife, gets a little stuck in that role too, because she needs to take care of him. So those three were the ones that really leaped out at me.
Let me say too, on that front, and I'll come back around to this, that of course, Phil also has an estrangement with his own daughter. So
right.
there is a parallel there to,
right.
basically the Gloucester
yes.
plot.
Yes, you're right. I forgot about that.
And I see that Sharon, what attracted the author to the theme of dementia? And that is a really good question. I looked through things that the author had said, and I can't remember anything specific. But you know what? I'm going to make a note to myself to look back again on Claire and dementia, and see if she admits or confesses to anything in her family that she might have based it on. I will talk very specifically about dementia later. I mean, one thing is it's just right now in a way that it never was in the past. Part of the zeitgeist, right? I mean, now everybody is very aware of dementia because of aging populations, and it's also been covered quite a bit in films and in books. Anybody else have any ideas on some of the ways that Rothman has used King Lear? And if not, I will welcome Janice. I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you.
If there are no other ideas or comments on that, I am going to go on to tell you the many ways that I found that that Rothman has used King Lear. So first of all, this is the most obvious. It's used as the title of the book. Secondly, it does provide a structure for the novel. There are 5 acts in the novel, as there are in the play, and roughly the same amount of scenes in the book as there are in the novel. It also provides another layer of structure. The rehearsals and performances of King Lear provide a foundation for the way that the book moves forward. There is the deep resonance, the depth that Shakespeare and his play brings to this book. And I think that is the most important thing that Rothman was, one of the very important things that Rothman was looking for in using Lear. And there is, as you look through all of the quotes from Lear that are peppered throughout this book, I think there's a recognition and even a delight as we recognize so many of those quotes. And then there is the theater lore and the richness and authenticity of that we find in this book, which reflects back again to Shakespeare and theater there. And then, of course, as was pointed out by Judy, there are the themes, the first of which is the domestic relationships and the domestic tragedy. As Judy said, fathers and daughters, fathers and sons as well, and sisters. There's the theme of aging, the theme of dementia. All of these are in both. Identity. The novel's epigraph sets up the main theme of the novel, identity, both under duress and at different stages of life. Who is it that can tell me who I am is a continuing thread through the book. There's politics. There's big politics in Lear, and there's politics referred to in the novel. And the Bible, which was, I'm going to come back to because I find this so fascinating. It has been suggested that the biblical book of Job and his ordeals provide an influence for the trials of Shakespeare's Lear. And literary commentators have some compelling quotes that show similarities. Harold Bloom, in his 1999 book, Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, also suggests a comparison with the older King Solomon. And he shows parallel quotes to support that as well. And I am also going to make an argument for the relationship between this and the Binding of Isaac. That's to come. Okay, let's talk about some of the general elements of the novel, unless anyone has any other comments to make. Okay, here we go. The novel, as I said, is divided into 5 acts. That's the conventional divisions of 17th century drama. And then it's divided into number sections, which basically correspond to scenes. Each act opens with a quotation from Lear, and we realize how full of memorable quotes the play is. The action of Shakespeare's King Lear takes place over just a few weeks, as the novel takes place over one summer. The rehearsals and performances presented throughout the novel also serve to advance the plot as they move through the play. We begin, though, after the general epigraph with a prologue. And here it is. It's from Kent. Alas, sir, are you here? Things that love, or maybe I should be reading, alas, sir, are you here? Things that love night, love not such nights as these. Alas, sir, are you here? Things that love night, love not such nights as these. Starting with alas shows the pathos of both Shakespeare's Lear and the characters of this novel. And with are you here, it places an emphasis on both the ideas of the setting, and we'll come to the setting of this book, which is so clearly Montreal. But the are you here is a reference to the madness and identity issues raised in both the play and the novel. The reference to the weather, so important to both. a continuing symbol of, shall we say, the tempest within. This is what we call pathetic fallacy, a literary device in which human emotions are attributed to aspects of nature, such as the weather. So I'm going to read the first paragraph of the book, because as you know, I think it's always a good signpost to what comes after, to look at what an author has chosen, how an author has chosen to open their book. The old man knows he should watch the road, but he can't. His eyes keep drifting to the black churn of cloud overhead. Nightfall is still an hour away, but the sky is so dark he can't see the white lines on the pavement. He curses, gropes for the headlight switch, presses buttons and turns knobs to no visible effect. The car plunges through the shadows, down the final stretch of Pine Avenue, past the Royal Victoria Hospital and the grimy stone archway of the Neurological Institute. It weaves across lanes as though driven by someone crazy or blind or both. I just recognized his cursing, which is a big part of many dementias. So the old man opens the book. We're in the dark, and there's a very specific location. This is where the accident in which his wife was killed occurred. And he is almost re-experiencing that accident. We get to the Neurological Institute, pointing to Saul's diagnosis, and he drives as if crazy or blind. And those themes, craziness and blindness, go throughout King Lear. The theme of true and psychological blindness. His loss of control and his fear of that loss of control, the nightmare quality, the raging tempest, where anything can happen and rules don't apply. And as we go a little further than this first paragraph, we get into the politics, the casserole and the student protests, and a general atmosphere of chaos. For those of, this is a novel firmly planted in Montreal. For those of you who are from there, I'm sure you can picture each street as it is named. So show of hands, how many of you are from Montreal? My husband is as well. Good, yeah, I knew there would be people from Montreal joining us. I'm sure it was, I'm sure you could see your Montreal reflected in this book. There's so many streets named and the parks where the play is performed and each neighborhood as it is portrayed. But Saul's Montreal is also very clear. It's not the contemporary plateau where much of this is set, but what he calls the Jewish ghetto, Saint-Urbain. And for those of you who might be following with your books, I'm going to page 247 now. Your street, for instance, he said to Artie, was once a hub of Jewish culture. In the 40s, when I was a kid, practically every Jewish institution of note in Montreal had an address there. The Jewish library was on the corner at Mount Royal. One door down from it, a woman called Ida Mays held these famous literary salons. The Jewish Aid Society was also on the block. And around the corner was the Jewish school I went to. He's really upset that his daughters have chosen to move back to that neighborhood. And it's a place that he worked hard to escape. And I recognize that very clearly because my mother grew up in downtown Toronto and we lived at the earliest part of my life on Clinton Street. And when I decided to move down to Brunswick Avenue, my parents were very upset. They had worked so hard to get us away from there and up to Bathurst and Steeles. And why would I choose to go back to that neighborhood? The institutions and the hospitals of Montreal are mentioned. Saul was a generous donor to the Samuel Rabinovich Hospital, although in that disorienting night, he didn't know who he was, but he knew to insist on that hospital. And we'll return to the Jewish content when we discuss the major theme of identity. Anybody have any comments now on anything I've said or on the Montreal setting of the book?
I'm not from Montreal. I've visited it a few times, but not enough to have a real good mental map of it. But I found when I was, and I read the book on my iPad, and I found that what I was doing was I was just keeping open the map of Montreal so that I could trace all of the streets. And I did know that the hospitals didn't have their real names, but everything else did. And so I could figure out where she was going and where the different hospitals were.
That's great.
To me, that's always fascinating to have that map open so that I can trace where the characters are moving around, especially if it's a city that I know even a little bit.
So Rosie. So I am from Montreal. And so it is indeed, so as I was reading it, I could actually picture, so you had a map, but I could picture the streets. I mean, I grew up later than the time frame, but I did grow up in that Saint Urbain. So the Jewish Public Library, like I went there with my dad, like that was, I remember Sunday mornings at the Jewish Public Library. So it did capture me. And then of course, there is of course a resurgence. So similar to even Toronto. So as you said, Cynthia, you've moved down, but we're living now in the Bathurst Wilson area where many of our friends who are Torontonian will say, you back onto the school? I used to go to that. Like, so it's that whole, a neighborhood. So for me living here, it's like, it's new to me, but it's not to the people who grew up in Toronto. So as I was reading her book, I'm thinking, oh my God, I remember walking those streets. I remember, the bagel place. So it's very much familiar, and she actually did capture it really well. And I actually could picture some of the locations where the theater company did their productions of the play. So we used to go often to the Mount Royal, and there would be all kinds of things going on the weekend there, productions and singing and et cetera, et cetera. So it did sort of resonate. So as I was reading it, I had a real appreciation. Yes, the hospitals, the names aren't the same, but it's not difficult to figure out where he was talking about. And I do have a question. So just can we sort of park it? You mentioned she often does books that have a relationship between, I think, father and child, or father and. Yeah. So if we could explore that, that would be great too, because that seemed to be prevalent throughout the whole book as well.
For sure, we will get to that a little later. And thank you very much, Rosie, for sharing your Montreal experience. And Sharon, you have a comment for us.
Yes, I wanted just to say how I was thrilled by the opening. I thought she did a fabulous job at bringing us into Montreal and helping us to familiarize ourselves with a setting which some of us are not as familiar with. But there were a lot of unanswered questions, and I felt I had to go back to the first few pages every few chapters just to remember how it all began, because I thought that the opening was exceptionally well done. That really was the most redeeming quality of the whole book, in my view, was how she got it underway. It was slow at times, but also I think it was slow in terms of the character development, but I loved the opening.
Good, thank you. I always think an opening, when I used to edit writers and talk to writers, I would say, you have to pay particular attention to your opening and your ending. And of course, that does seem self-evident, but it's not as evident as you might think, because I also would encourage writers to make sure that they went back and rewrote their beginning once they were finished the book, or made sure that the beginning is the appropriate beginning for the book that they then wrote. Interesting, as I say that, I've been preparing for our next book, House on Endless Waters, and that's actually an interesting insight into the way the writer there deals with the novel that he is writing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyone else with any other comments? Please, at any time, if you have a question or a comment, go onto the chat. Again, personal reflections, all welcome. I'm going to now move on to the other aspect of the setting of this book, which is the theater. And Judy knows that Judy has herself right now, is working in theater. And I have a history of theater myself from when I was young. I started in theater when I was 7, and continued throughout university and a little bit beyond. So I love anything that has to do with the theater. We get some really lovely moments of theater lore here, which Claire Rothman would have learned from her experience at that Macbeth production. And I recognize so many of these things from my own experience. So, for example, one little piece of theater lore, I did not know the origins of Break a Leg, which, you know, everybody says when you're about to begin a production, you know, your friends, your family say break a leg, the cast members say it to each other, and I just took it completely for granted. And actually, I thought it meant if you say break a leg, you're staving off injury and tragedy. But actually, where it's from, it originally comes from take a bow. So break a leg in that way. So the very fact is that any theater company, I see someone has, Nat, is that you, Nata? If it is, yes. Do you have oh, it is you. I can see your face. Please comment now before I go on. Do you have a comment to make? You have to unmute yourself. You can't unmute? Let me see. Can I can't unmute you. Go down to the bottom of your screen. Nata, can you go down to the bottom of your screen and see mute in the corner there and push that? There we go.
Okay, it's just my comment, you know, because I got recently book from library, so I haven't finished, but I like it very much. It's a real contemporary, I feel like I'm there, you know. So of course I will finish it soon, but I was so surprised to read the book about somebody who was stage manager, because this was best part of my being in Canada. Judy Malkin knows, is my stagecraft career at Holly Blossom. I hope we will be again there after this virus time.
That's lovely. Thank you, Nata, thank you. And good to hear your voice. Rosie, do you have another comment to make? Please do.
I do, only because I was also part of a theater group, the Dora Wasserman Yiddish theater group in Montreal. And so I did that for many, many years before I moved here. And she really did capture that world quite well, like between the stage manager and all the, so Nata, I feel for you, but all of the stuff that stage managers have to do, and you know, place things in the right place, and if they don't, it could change the nuance of the play, as it did in one of the plays I was in, and we're all searching for a prop that was supposed to be there and it wasn't there. So like you had to make it up as you went because the prop was gone, and things like that. But on top of it, I could hear the 5 minutes. That was That's a standard, just like break a leg is. And you know what, Cynthia, I didn't know that either. I had no idea what it was. I thought it was good luck but so that was news to me. But I could hear the 5 minutes because everyone always got the 5 minutes. 5 minutes, like I could still even hear the stage manager coming in to say 5 minutes all the time. So she did really capture the essence of that role really well. I could feel it as I was reading the book.
Thank you, Rosie. And as you say that about 5 minutes, it makes me remember the feeling that we had when that 5 minutes was called. And I remember always thinking to myself, why do I put myself through this? Because of all the butterflies in my stomach, why do I do this to myself? And then of course you go out there and it's completely different. It's quite wonderful. A little tiny bit like chanting Torah, but different. But I do, I also sometimes really miss that experience, that high of being in the theater. But that high is accompanied because it's all high drama in the theater. And it's a hothouse of emotions, right? It's all performers, and it is an absolute hothouse. And relationships, including romance and sex, rise and fall, friendships develop or falter, disagreements can erupt into major disruption to the performance or to the run. And as B reflects, backstage drama had eclipsed Shakespeare. But a theater cast and crew are also incredibly tight. As B reflects, they were a troupe, a tribe, bound by traditions of solidarity that were ancient even in Shakespeare's time. And Shakespeare, we know, thought of the theater, his milieu, as a continuing metaphor for life. The epigraph for Act 3 in this novel is from Lear. When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools. And of course, there's the great speech from As You Like It. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. Lear's shadow is also set in a particular time, the late spring of 2012, time of the raw food movement that crudivore depends on amidst environmental concerns. And most important, the student protests and riots, providing a time of unrest and discomfort for the city. This provides the parallel to the politics of King Lear and the wars that happened there. Let me read to you from page 156. B followed their gaze. A line of men in black boots and body armor was moving north on Saint Laurent Boulevard from the direction of the river. They wore white helmets, their visors sparkling in the sun. They carried dark shields marked with the word police in large white letters. They were advancing slowly and deliberately. And although the Me Too movement was not in full swing, we can feel that the author is pre-shadowing that just a little bit. Okay, I'll pause a moment for comments, and then we're going to go on to our next topic, which will be old age. Anybody have anything they want to comment on now? Okay, old age. This is a big, big theme in the book, and both Phil and Saul represent versions of old age. We can see Phil very clearly, representative of Shakespeare's sixth act in that speech, All the World's a Stage. So here is the 6th act. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon. With spectacles on nose and pouch on side, his youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice turning again toward childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. This is what Phil is fighting. This is why he turns to drinking and to flirting. There's so much he's trying to hold on to. We watch his disintegration, and it is well and poignantly portrayed. You will remember the deeply affecting scene where in rehearsal, Phil pulls his sweatshirt from his body. Quoting from the novel, he was gone, staring into space, not registering Artie's lines as they came at him. No trace of the proud, vigorous actor remained. In his place was someone much older, someone utterly defenseless and exposed. The sight was so devastating, Bea wanted to run and throw her arms around him. We can see there the echoes from Lear. But even more affecting is during the performance, when he, as the novel says, lost it altogether. In rehearsal, he had lost his lines at the point where a frustrated and humiliated Lear shouts out to his daughters and their servants, "Does any here know me?" And in performance, it is even more dramatic. Page 199. Now he staggered about the stage, ignoring the blocking and mumbling all kinds of extraneous nonsense. He blinked into the stage lights. "Does any here know me?" he asked, bewildered. He paused, surveying the crowd as if expecting someone to answer. The audience stopped fidgeting. Phil took a shaky step toward them. "This is not Lear," he said in a voice not much louder than a whisper. "Does Lear walk thus? Speak thus?" He looked like a toddler, unbalanced, yet determined, learning how to walk. His hand touched his throat, then his eyes. "Where are his eyes?" he sobbed and fell to his knees. Even from behind, he was riveting. He could not continue. Although ultimately we learn that Phil was just suffering from temporary problems and is not only well enough to perform brilliantly, but also at 70 to attract a much younger woman, he represents through himself and through his performance of Lear the transitions to Shakespeare's famous seventh age, where Saul is. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. But even in dementia, we know that the elderly, and we're learning that more and more now during COVID, deserve respect and recognition. Goneril and Reagan are, as soon as possible, ready to take all power from their father and direct him completely. From King Lear, "Oh, sir, you are old. Nature in you stands on the very verge of his confine. You should be ruled and led by some discretion that discerns your state better than yourself." No wonder Lear rages against this. No wonder Saul's anger breaks out. So now let's look at the topic of dementia. Lear fears the madness that he feels encroaching. "Oh, let me not be mad, not mad. Sweet heaven, keep me in temper. I would not be mad." Is there a hint here that Lear suspects his turning mind and therefore felt he must divest? How aware was Saul? In the novel, dementia is so well depicted. My father had Alzheimer's. My late father had Alzheimer's, and I'm sure many of you have been touched by it. It's a big subject these days for books and films. Many of you may remember one of the first, Still Alice, published in 2007, and also the beautiful, touching, sad film, Away from Her, based on an earlier Alice Munro story. As our population ages, our parents, and even our own generation, become sadly familiar with dementia. Kara says of Saul, something weird has been going on with him. And when Bee visits her father, she observes that her 79-year-old father, pillar of the community, seems to have cracked. There is also an interesting moment that I recognize. When Bee realizes that they believed their father was raving when he spoke of the angel being defaced, but it was true. This is a challenge for all of us who love someone with dementia. They can also be capable of knowledge, of seeing and doing things we think they are beyond. And we, those who love them, must be aware of that. Indeed, Saul has the insight to recognize that his daughter Kara's husband is betraying her. We see all of the necessary steps and legal tests towards a diagnosis. The acquiring power of attorney. And of course, there we absolutely hear the echoes of King Lear. And the taking away of his car keys, one of the most terrible steps. Any of you have experienced it, know what it's like when you have to take the car keys away from your loved one. The tests for dementia and the daughter's shocked recognition of how bad it is as he does the clock drawing. Saul's response when he is told that he will need round-the-clock care is revealing and understandable. On the basis of what, he cries, counting backwards by sevens, drawing pictures of cubes? This is how you decide a man's fate? Okay, so I will pause for a moment now to see if any of you have any comments or questions or anything about the depiction of dementia in our novel. Okay, so on to a related subject, which is that of identity. The theme of dementia is completely tied to that of identity and self-knowledge in both King Lear and in Lear's Shadow. The novel's epigraph is, "Who is it that can tell me who I am?" Goneril and Regan observe about Lear, "He hath ever but slenderly known himself," with the same implication that self-knowledge was never his strength. Saul is much the same, and probably following the car accident, he avoided self-questioning. Early in the novel, Kara says of Saul to Bee, "He's not himself." Let's look at the use of disguise or masks in Lear. Kent, Edgar, and Fool are all in disguise or in some way. We see the outside, but what is within? Bee thinks this play was full of disguises. She hadn't made up her mind what Shakespeare was trying to say, but the play seemed to turn on the question of appearances and what exactly lay beneath. So how might this be explored in the novel? I'm asking all of you, how do you think there's a parallel way that disguises or masks are used in Lear's Shadow? Anybody have any idea about how that Shakespearean theme is used?
Yeah.
Who?
That's me, Judy.
Judy. Yep.
Well, I really thought, I just want to backtrack a bit because I really thought that the author did a fantastic job of depicting dementia. One of the things that I do with Act Two Studio at Ryerson is I'm part of a traveling show about dementia, and it's called "I'm Still Here." And so that quote of, who am I, or Kara saying to Bee, he's not himself. I mean, it just goes to that core, I think. But in terms of the masks, I mean, people, one of the things that we have learned about dementia is that people recognizing that they are not themselves in the early stages can be extremely clever about covering up and about putting on that mask of, no, I am still the person that you always thought. I'm still capable of driving. I'm still capable of looking after myself. No, I do not need somebody in this house 24/7 to look after me. What's the matter with you that you don't think I can take care of myself? So that mask that a lot of dementia sufferers put on, especially in the early stages. I mean, I've had many people say to me, I didn't realize until close to the end how much my mom, dad, whoever was hiding things for years, because people don't want that loss of control. And I think she showed that. She really did.
Yeah, I think it's very, I think she does the dementia topic very well. Anybody else have any comments? Am I missing anyone? You can just actually demute yourself and talk if you want to. Anybody? Okay, so
Yeah, I'm just gonna, it's Rosie. I'm just gonna, the other mask I thought was B and her cleft palate. So,
sorry, that word?
sorry?
B's what?
Her cleft palate. So her,
Absolutely,
so, right?
thank you, thank you.
So the sort of that whole facial mask and pretending, almost pretending that it's not there, but it is there. And finally, at the end, I think there was like a reconciliation that this was who she is. Now, part of it was a love interest, but I think never feeling like, so always masking that she felt she was, had to wear a mask almost, because she wasn't the same as others. And so, you know, uncovering that and finally sort of, this is who I am, and that's what my face looks like. So I saw that as a masking of sorts.
Very, very good, thank you. Anyone else on masks and disguises in the book? Just speak up if there's anything. Okay, so I just have a little more on that as a mask. Phil's womanizing bluster, I think that's what he kind of puts on. Mimi's antagonism, that's a mask. We see it drop later. Even Kara's calmness, Artie's quiet, and back to what Rosie said, B's shyness. All of these are masking their various kinds of vulnerability. The identity question.
I've got something else, Cynthia. The other thing too is that the whole story rooted in the theater, because that's what actors do all the time. And when you really get yourself into a character, you put that mask on, and that can carry over into real life as well. And I think a lot of the theater troupe members were putting on their masks in their offstage interactions with the others.
Especially when you have a role like Lear. Yep. It's, you know, you get so deeply into that, you do carry it on, or feel that you have to carry it with you afterwards. Yep. Thanks. Identity in Lear's shadow is less dramatic and more tied to regular life. Saul has that identification we talked about earlier with the old plateau neighborhood. Roots, Saul says quietly, there is nothing more important in this life. And this brings us to talk a little bit about the Jewish content of the novel. Jewish Montreal is an important part of the setting, and Jewish custom is easily integrated into the book, like a reference of a rock on a grave or the Shabbat candles. The Rose, or Rosenberg family, is obviously now secular, but there are references to Rosh Hashanah celebrations and temple attendance. But the most important part, of course, is Bee's surprised to find that her father has been saying Abba in his sleep, and she doesn't know what that word is. Of course, it's father, and in his delusional moments. She finds out from Mimi what the word means. And it is Mimi who coaxes Saul to talk about his father, their immigration from Poland, and the fact that B's mother never converted. It is certainly then part of Saul's identity. And that brings us to Saul's father, from whom he was estranged. So here we have the father-son relationship, again echoing father-son relationships in Lear. And I must say that I never quite understood the estrangement and would like your help with this. So here's my next question to you. What occasioned the estrangement between Saul and his father?
I suspect it was his marriage to somebody who wasn't Jewish. That's what I thought, as pretty much off the bat when I realized that B's mother wasn't Jewish.
Anyone else? Anyone else? I don't know, but I think it has something, this was a bit obscure to me, but is it that he blames his father, that through the father, B inherited the gene for her cleft, which the young B notices the first and only time she sees her grandfather. His nose was flat like hers, but most shocking of all, a white line shimmered on his upper lip, dividing his face in two. B had never seen this on an adult. And this is what B thinks. Our grandfather was damaged. There was no place in Dad's life for damaged things. So I just have a feeling that that's part of it. And yeah, I think it is. So as Rosie mentioned, B's cleft is a huge part of her identity. And it's basically made her what she is, her shyness, her hiding behind other people, her charismatic partner in the yoga, even behind Artie. And she remembers Artie because he was the one who did not tease her and protected her during playground cruelty. She was never at all comfortable with her appearance. And of course, her father did have an obsession with fixing her, probably exacerbated that in her early years. I mean, if you have a parent who's constantly saying that you have to be fixed and you are not right the way you are, that's going to have a big effect on you going forward. B is at a turning point. Quote, B would turn 40 this summer. No man, no money, and a business on the point of collapse. She is mourning the loss of her partner, which reflects her larger loss of her mother years before. Change and growth and identity confusion is also reflected in the use of Alice in Wonderland in the novel. B is reading it to Kara's younger daughter and reflecting all the changes in that child's life, quoting from the book. She was Alice, trying to find order in a world gone suddenly and grossly awry. B had forgotten how moving Lewis Carroll could be. By chapter 5, Alice had already shrunk and grown and shrunk again. Now the caterpillar was in Alice's path. Who are you? He demanded. Poor Alice couldn't come up with an answer. She'd changed so many times that she no longer had a clue. Very early in the book, as B enters the room for the company party, it says, they were in a sort of a tunnel that served as a vestibule. A curtain hanging at the far end hid whatever lay beyond. It had the feel of a fairy tale or Alice in Wonderland. B at the lip of a rabbit hole. So do you think that B's experience with the theater company and everything that happens over that summer brings her to greater self-knowledge, to greater confidence? How do you think B experiences that, and how is she different at the beginning of the book and towards the end? Where do you see her journey taking her? Please just speak up, unmute yourself, and speak up if you'd like to comment on B through the novel.
So I think that B becomes much more self-confident and independent. Like she always felt like she needed someone or some to compliment herself, like to have a compliment. And by the end, I really think she's come into her own, and there's a much more of an acceptance as to who she is. So you talked about identity. There's much more of an acceptance as to who she is and what her identity is, and almost like a bit of a calmness, even in her relationship with her sister. She always had a really good relationship with her nieces. It sounded like. I think she would have loved her father to give her some sign. That didn't happen, but there seemed to be much more of a resolute, this is who I am, and I'm not going to be upset by it, and so I'm now exhibiting much more of a confidence attached to it, and she's more positive. She's not defeatist. So I felt she was quite defeatist at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think
I agree with that. Certainly at the beginning, she felt like she couldn't do anything. She was losing the yoga studio. She probably felt like her former partner was the brains and the brawn behind the studio. So I think she felt totally defeated at the beginning, and realized that, through in essence, the caretaking that she was doing as the assistant stage manager, that gave her coping skills. And by the end of the novel, I think she thought of herself as somebody who could do things. And I think she also saw the breakdown in her sister's relationship, as her sister was not on the pedestal that the father and she had always put her on, but she didn't take joy in that. She didn't really experience any schadenfreude in that, but I think felt that Kara's got something to offer and I have something to offer too. And if that means, being the one who's there for those two little girls who need somebody to be there while Kara is running the dad's business, then I can do that, and I'm competent in doing that. So yeah, I definitely agree with Rosie. She came into herself, and by the end felt like she did have some value, which she didn't think at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good. I think it's good character development through the book, and it feels natural and unstrained in the way that it happens through her experiences in the theater company. You'll recall that Dave, her boss, said to her that there were two kinds of stage managers. Netta, I don't know if you would agree with this, and sort of, if I remember correctly, one was as the sort of nurturing parent or the mother, and the other was a kind of military type. And he says he's the mother type, the nurturing type, and so should she be. And as the one without a partner and without children, in taking over that role, she grows into recognizing many of her strengths, but also she recognizes her strengths in being someone who can be depended on to get the show going, because she does it and she answers the call, and that gives her every bit of confidence. Anybody else want to comment on that side of the novel?
I kind of saw it really being from a lost to found, from being lost in terms of her life and what was happening to it. And as she got into the theater company and met people and created relationships and had responsibility, gained that confidence that she kind of lost as a result of her situation.
Mhm.
And then once she got that, she was able to relate better and kind of figure it out as to what makes sense.
I like that, lost and found, because yeah, finding yourself, of course, that's part of Lear and part of the book, but also that you can tell at the beginning from the references to her personal history that she did lose bits of herself all the way along. In other words, right from the beginning, because she didn't look like other people, she lost a sense of physical identity. And then it goes on, as many of you have already commented, she lost more of herself by giving herself over to her stronger partner, etc. And she finds herself through all these experiences. So I like that way of looking at it. Thank you. Okay, any other comment? All right, so I'm going to turn to one last thing, and then I'll save the rest for our next class. So the next topic I'm going to talk about briefly is will and self-determination. So there's a brilliant conversation, which you might not know that you know, but you do know it, between Gloucester and his villainous bastard son, Edmund, on this subject of self-determination, which was a favorite subject of William Shakespeare. So let me read that to you here. This is Gloucester talking. These late eclipses in the sun and moon pretend no good to us. Though the wisdom of nature can reason it thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the sequent events. Love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide. In cities, mutinies. In countries, discord. In palaces, treason. And the bond cracked twixt father and son. There's son against father. The king falls from bias of nature. There's father against child. We have seen the best of our time. Machinations, hollowness, treachery, and all ruinous disorders follow us disquietly to our graves. And Edmund, the villain, responds, this is the excellent foppery of the world, that when we are sick in fortune, often the surfeits of our own behavior, we make guilty of our disasters the sun, the moon, and the stars, as if we were villains on necessity, fools by heavenly compulsion, knaves, thieves, and treachers by spherical predominance, drunkards, liars, and adulterers by an enforced obedience of planetary influence, and all that we are evil in by a divine thrusting on. An admirable evasion of whoremaster man to lay his goatish disposition on the charge of a star. My father compounded with my mother under the dragon's tail, and my nativity was under Ursa Major, so that it follows I am rough and lecherous. Phut, I should have been that I am, had the maidenliness star in the firmament twinkled on my bastardizing. So a great bit of Shakespeare then. But wow, when you read what Gloucester says, doesn't it feel like right now? Like, isn't that scary? Love cools, friendship falls off, brothers divide, in cities mutinies, in countries discord, in palaces treason, and the bond cracked twixt son and father. So, so there are the two sides of the topic of will and self-determination. And there is a bit of that in this book as well. Some things that might have been meant to be, and those things that we control within ourselves. We had that discussion about B, right? She has to take that control. She might have been born a certain way, almost equal to Edmund being a bastard, her cleft palate, but you can overcome these things that that does not have to be the map for your future, that you have the right of self-determination. Okay, so I am going to stop my sort of formal comments here for now. And let me know right now, anybody who wants to make a comment or a question on anything that we've talked about thus far. Is that a hand up? Rudermans, please unmute, that's the word. Okay.
Hello. Cynthia, I got a lot more out of this book. I thought it was really very well done. I also have done a lot of theater many years ago, and so that led me into the book, and I loved that part of it, but it really had so much more to it. I think you've done a wonderful job bringing it all out. It was a good book, much better than I thought it was when I started. You know, I thought, what kind of book is this? But it was really quite good.
Thank you, Marlene, thank you. Anybody else have a general comment or a question for something that you'd like me to take up next time? Because we're not finished yet.
Can I speak without making a comment?
Susan, go ahead, ask him.
I thought that the idea of the father stabbing B was a little unrealistic. I had a little, I mean, I accepted it. It was dramatic, but I thought it was a little unrealistic and maybe a little far-fetched for the plot. I wonder if anybody else thought that. Just what I thought.
Yeah, we will definitely come back and talk about that as we talk about the end of the book. Yeah, it might be a bit, it might be very hard to accept, actually, although it has been so set up through the novel by emphasizing the dangerous and violent aspects of the Lewy bodies that he has. So you kind of know that something is probably going to happen, but that has its symbolic repercussions and implications as well as the actual. Of course, the question is, does the actual, you know, is it sufficiently believable to allow us to move into those things that are symbolic about it? And any other last comments? Just speak up and unmute yourself.
Well, hi, Cynthia. I don't have my video on. I'm just in my kitchen doing things, but it's Rosalie.
Okay.
It's Rosalie. Hi, this is, yeah, I really enjoyed the book, but my question is, what deems a book a Jewish book? Because when I was reading it, you know, you see the comparisons with the play King Lear and all that, but what is, because it takes place in Montreal and there's some notations about comments about the Jewish area and maybe Abba, and you know, they're talking about a Jewish holiday, but you know, they don't practice anything. So why was it a Jewish book? Because it won a prize for
it did.
the Jewish book.
Okay, so that's I have a complicated, slightly, not complicated, but I'll say first of all, for the purposes of this class and for my book clubs, I have to admit to taking sometimes even the smallest amount of Jewish content as an excuse to study a book. So I like that there's Jewish content in a book, but you know, for my purposes, I take that and then it gives me an opportunity to look at a book as a whole. As you know, some of the books that I'll talk about, like for example, our next one, there's no question about the Jewish content in that, but others, there's only a slim amount of Jewish content. So, so there's that. But for the question of the Jewish Book Awards, I think it's almost the same answer, and also a larger answer. I mean, is there a kind of Jewish approach to things? So when we were talking about adult education at Holy Blossom, I remember my husband said, well, you know, I think we can do anything or even activities, you know, that you can layer on it something Jewish. And oh, who was the rabbi at the time? Isn't that terrible? I liked him so much. He was a good scholar. Anyway, Michael Satz, he said, well, we can talk about bicycle repair And I can give it a Jewish interpretation and Jewish, sort of, there can be a Jewish aura around it. And, I believe that too. In this book, I'm going to come next time to my little secret weapon in this subject, which is I'm going to talk about the Akedah and the binding of Isaac. But yeah, that's my approach to Jewish books, is that they don't have to be filled with Jewish content to make them interestingly
Right.
Jewish.
Yeah, I'm not questioning your choice. I mean, it's fine, but I'm just why it got an award for Jewish content. But that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rosalie. Oh, now I see your face. Good to see you. Anybody else? Okay. So I'll see you again next week. So I've learned something that whenever anybody wants to make a comment or something, you can just speak up. You can also do something in the comments and I'll see it. But if the urge comes upon you that you want to talk, please talk. I want to encourage more conversation. Next time, we're going to go through the following topics: domestic drama, Lear parallels, and the binding of Isaac. A lot on that. And the ending of the book, and then I have questions to throw out to you. So be more prepared to bring your own ideas and your own contributions. A reminder that if somebody wants to borrow the book, these are the names, that Barbara does have a copy. And yeah, Father
Cynthia. Oh,
yes. Linda?
Cynthia, can I just make a comment?
Sure.
Before we go?
Please.
Just about what makes the book Jewish. I was just going to say I'm in Ottawa and I'm from Montreal, but I'm joining you. And I just thought, being from Montreal, Saul was from a very, very Jewish area, but he came away from there, and Melville, which was his street, was in Westmount, which is much more non-Jewish. It's a place where you're more secular and it looks like you've really made it. But then, and he changes his name and that, but then he dreams of his father, and he also has checks returned where he tried to pay his father. And so that Jewish guilt, I don't know what I'm trying to say, except that in the end, his Jewish identity was somehow with him as much as he was trying to become more secular or whatever. There's a complex issue with that.
I think you're right, Linda, and I probably didn't spend enough time talking about that aspect of Saul's character, because it's definitely there. I mean, it's obviously included for a reason, part of the larger issue of identity, but also because this is a book with an important Jewish theme to it, about what you keep, what you give up, about relationships between fathers and sons, and particularly those Jewish relationships between fathers and sons. So I'm glad to see people. We have someone from Ottawa, we have someone from Arizona, we have someone from Huntsville. There may be people from other places. That's the real benefit to being able to do this on Zoom, that people can come from anywhere. So I hope you will all join me again next week at 10:30. And also for those of you who come to Good Books, it'll be a busy week. Tuesday morning and Thursday morning. I will see you all then. And for now, thank you so much for
joining us. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
My great pleasure. Take care, everyone. Have a good week.
Thanks, Cynthia. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.